This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in to watch NC Spin this week. We've got a program as hot as the outside temperatures has been. It's beginning with the differences between the Senate and House versions of the state budget. We'll ask whether there's a deliberate but subtle attempt to decentralize state government, then talk about billions of dollars in debt our state owes but seldom gets discussed. Plus, as usual, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Joining us on this week's panel after too long an absence, Dennis Wicker, former lieutenant governor, Becki Gray, vice president of the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon, the director of the Newsroom, and again, after too long an absence, former House Speaker Joe Mavretic. Well, we'll begin our uninterrupted discussion following these brief messages from our underwriters.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Before we begin, I want to thank our friend Brad Crone for sitting in for me last week. I great marks on what the show looked like. So let's get started. A month ago, the North Carolina House passed their budget proposals and sent them to the Senate. Well, this week, the Senate passed their own budget, which contained some big differences between the House budget and theirs. The next step is that a conference committee is going to be formed to try to iron out those differences. Becki, in recent years, the House and Senate have sort of collaborated together in the budget process to speed along the ultimate passage. It's pretty obvious there wasn't a lot of cooperation this year. What do you attribute that difference to?
Tom, I'm not sure that I agree with that, to be honest with you. I mean, one of the reasons why we saw the difference in the House budget and the Senate budget is because there were some surprises that occurred between the two being passed. The big one was $637 million surplus came out of nowhere. That was a big surprise, a good surprise. But, you know, that was one of the big differences. And then some other things. I mean, there was some things to do with hospitals, and the Senate is always going to put their stamp on it. I don't see those two documents as being that far apart, and I certainly don't see, I see that there's plenty of room for compromise. I don't think we're going to have one of these where this conference is going to go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. I think it'll be pretty quick.
That's interesting, because I do see some pretty big differences between the two of them. One of them starts, Chris, with state employees. The Senate gave the state employees $1,000 or 1%, whichever was greater. The Senate, on the other hand, the House did that. The Senate, on the other hand, gives them 2.5% a year for the next 2 years.
Right.
That's setting up some disagreements there.
Well, it sets up the battle again between state employees and teachers, but it also brings up the fact of why are we choosing? Both the Senate budget leaves a lot of money, puts money in the rainy day fund, which is good, but leaves a lot of money that's unspent. And remember, we cut taxes $3.6 billion to sort of set up these false choices. I do want to get in one quick thing, which is one of the reasons that we, again, and former Speaker Mavretic knows this better than anybody, the Senate budget was put together in the corner room, which is why we didn't know about all this stuff. The Appropriations Committee didn't meet for 6 weeks before it came out. Part of the way you could have a much more smooth budget process is to let people know what's happening as it's happening, which we never do anymore.
Well, you know, I pick up on...
I remember the year you were Speaker. Your budget hearings lasted
a long time.
Yeah.
But when you talk about how we treat state employees and retirees, one of the things that I'm focused on is the COLA issue, cost of living. Most people don't understand this, but the first 10 years that you're retired without any COLAs, you lose 25% of your buying power. It's a lot. We need to address that.
Absolutely.
No question about it. Another big area, Dennis, where there were some differences had to do with teachers. Now, the House had essentially a 4.6% pay increase for teachers, particularly those that had been there for longer than 15 years. The Senate gives essentially a 3.5% pay increase. We've moved from 47th in the nation to 29th in the nation. We know we've got teacher shortages. What is this Senate budget going to do so far as alleviating these teacher shortages? Anything?
I don't think so. I think their emphasis is on the state employees this year because they haven't had the raises the teachers have had. And they feel like the teachers are in a pretty good spot nationally on the national scale of things. But remember, the House budget doesn't come into play until January 1.
That's exactly right.
And that's a big difference.
Big difference. Because the Senate budget takes effect July 1, assuming they get to pass one.
Assuming they get
July
passed.
1.
Yeah, but however, you know, not bringing it in until the 1st of January causes some confusion and uncertainty out there. People don't really know what's going on, and I'm not sure that that's not intended.
All those, what is it, 113 different school systems across the state?
Everybody's got to account for that. That's right.
Becki, I want to get back to a point that you made early on. The $700 million, which came in because of increased tax returns and spending that was not up to budget. Yeah, capital gains and so forth. The Senate's going to put into the rainy day fund, and total will be $1.1 billion. Now, President Pro Tem Berger says we need a $2.6 billion reserve fund. This will help go a long way. That's quite a bit different than what the House did.
Yeah, it is. And of course, one of the differences was the House didn't have that money, that surplus at the time they were putting their budget together. I mean, the House has committed, both verbally and in their budget. They did have some money going into the savings, but everybody's talked about that. And, you know, as we continue the hurricane recovery and spending that money, getting the eastern part of the state back on their feet, more and more it is important, and people realize how important that rainy day fund is. And in the Senate budget, they not only replace what they took out for hurricane recovery, they put more in to get towards that recommended amount.
Chris, before we get off the subject of education, the Senate budget has $4.8 billion set aside for school construction, which we're told is desperately needed in North Carolina. It comes in 3 different accounts, but we don't know exactly how they're going to do it, do we?
No, we don't know, and there's a big question mark. And before the session started, we all talked about the school bond issue referendum, which appears to be sort of withering on the vine now. At a time when we do have low interest rates and we have all those needs, especially in our urban counties. This will be a big bone of contention, I think, as the budget compromise is reached.
And also remember that school construction debate always has an element of, are we going to have some standard packages, or is every school building going to be different?
Right.
And that is a difference between the House and Senate budget than the proposal. And with the governor and the House have looked more at issuing bonds, where the Senate has said, we want to pay as you go. We feel like that's the more reasonable way to get the maximum you can get out of that money.
Dennis, the Senate budget has $2.5 million to build a monument on the Capitol grounds dedicated to the contribution Black Americans have made in North Carolina, Black North Carolinians have made in our state. Is this to try to ameliorate some of the angst about the Silent Sam and the Confederate statues and public grounds and so forth?
I don't know, but that's some dangerous ground to walk on, I'll tell you that. I hope so. I think it's a great idea to honor African-American citizens in such a way, and I hope that they can see it through. It's one-time money, of course, and if they don't get a budget, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, but they've also allocated $15 million a year for 2 years for rural broadband, which, of course, Senator Harry Brown has been so instrumental in trying to push, and he's gotten that in the budget.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question to try to get ahead of this. The rural areas certainly need it, both east and west.
Becki, the issue that as we are recording this program, is just unfolding all around us is the East Carolina Vidant health issue, and whether the Senate wants to do away with funding to Vidant and build a new hospital down in Greenville or whether the UNC is. This thing looks like it has potential for disaster written all over.
It does, and this is unfolding even as we're speaking, and I think that we'll hear more about this next week. I think there's additional information and efforts to get some kind of coalition or some sort of agreement on this. But Tom, here's where this stems from. For years, public teaching hospitals have gotten a different Medicaid reimbursement rate because they're public teaching hospitals. The Brody School of Medicine, ECU, Biden has gotten that because they've been a public teaching hospital. There's a different, but there's a different Medicaid reimbursement for the private hospitals. So what occurred in the Senate budget that kind of started this big hoopla, if you will. Well, actually, it was before that, but Biden has broken that contract in many people's minds, therefore doesn't qualify for that
owned
break.
by Pitt County. That's public.
But hence, you know, just this exchange you and I are having, this is happening on a much broader basis with a lot of other people involved with it.
Nobody knew this was happening at all. Legislators from Eastern North Carolina didn't know this until the budget popped out of the back room into the Appropriations Committee, which is another reason we could have had a sane discussion about this for the last 2 months.
One thing that wasn't in this budget was Medicaid expansion, and Governor Cooper has just said that without Medicaid, he's not going to approve.
That's the bargaining chip. That's the bargaining chip between.
I'm not so sure it is, Mr. Speaker. I really don't.
So?
I think this governor's very serious about it, and I think he'll throw the gauntlet down on it.
He's going to veto this budget.
And let me tell you, we got to remember Medicaid expansion polls very high in North Carolina.
All right, here's my question. When are we going to pass a budget in North Carolina? We got to go conference. I think there's some pretty big differences between the House and the Senate. I think there's going to be some arguments going back and forth on that. Then they got the Cooper veto. Can they override it? When are we going to have a budget?
I agree with Becki. I don't think there's that much of a difference between the House and the Senate. They'll settle quickly. I think when the governor comes to the table, it's going to be anybody's guess as to what could happen.
I think so too. I think it's important to remember, so far what we've seen are practice budgets. We're getting ready to go into the real game.
Remember the year you were Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we were in late August before we got a budget.
Yeah, I would recommend people not to book rooms before Labor Day.
I was his majority leader, and I
get the Halloween decorations out. What do you think?
Oh, I think it'll be at least that long. And remember that not only is it popular with the people, 37 states, including Mike Pence's Indiana, expanded it. This is a very popular thing, and it's gonna be a sticking point all summer.
I want to switch topics here. When North Carolina was debating where to locate the capital, legend has it they spent an evening being liquored up by Isaac Hunter at his Wake County Tavern. Now, the outcome of that 1788 event was a decision that the new capital would be 10 miles from Hunter's Tavern. Raleigh was selected and has been the seat of state government ever since. But in recent years, there's been some movement to decentralize state government. The Senate budget we just talked about moves the Department of Health and Human Services, the largest agency in state government, to Granville County. Dennis Wicker, we just saw DMV move to Rocky Mount. What's the impetus here to decentralize state government and move out of Raleigh?
This reminds me of the old saying that some things don't change. But I will tell you, this move, and the DMV thing isn't done really, not yet. But the honest answer is, Tom, I don't think anybody has a clue why they're trying to do this. I will tell you that I don't understand how they're going to recruit talent to a rural county like Granville County.
I just don't see Secretary Cohen moving to Granville County. I'm sorry.
I just don't see that. I don't understand how they're going to be able to. I think this comes from an idea that happened in Tennessee, and it's a model they're trying to follow. But I'm not sure it'll work in North Carolina.
I like the idea.
Do you?
Absolutely. Wait a minute, I'm in favor of it, and I'll tell you why. For decades, one of a good friend of Dennis and mine, it was Martin Nesbitt, who said prison location was economic development. And I agree. And I think the decentralization of government in a technology area is a good idea. Why don't we get rid of Central Prison in the middle of the capital downtown?
Let's move the legislature back down to New Bern where they started off. And then, let's see, we can take the Department of Transportation and put them in where? Chatham County?
As long as you got roads to get there, what difference does it make? I agree with Joe. This makes perfect sense.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, part of this is because the General Assembly does not like Raleigh and the City of Raleigh leadership, and this is part of that is where do we stop? Why don't we move DEQ to Transylvania County And why don't we move DOT to Gates County, and let's make it impossible not only to recruit talent, but for citizens to find a central place to go.
Next week,
Well,
by the way.
you're going to have 2,000 people or more commuting on a road that's already congested between the two places. Let me ask this question. Why wouldn't they let it out for bid and be competitive about it? Why didn't they let other counties participate?
Why did they put it in the,
wait,
why did they put it in the budget? Why can't we have a hearing about this and talk about what's best for the taxpayers and the people? Why is it in the budget?
With the DMV, they made the conscious decision that we didn't want to own state property and build buildings anymore. Now they're talking about this building in Granville County. They're going to build and own that building.
And guess who owns the property in Rocky Mount? A prominent Republican who gives money to prominent Republicans, who owns the building where it's going in Rocky Mount. That's probably just a coincidence.
But don't forget, I mean, these decisions have come about because that DMV headquarters in Raleigh is full of asbestos. They have to do something. They've got to move them somewhere. Look at real estate prices in Raleigh and look at real estate prices in Rocky Mount.
DHHS has got to move
because of
you
the
know what? There was
Dorothea
asbestos in the legislative building. Why don't we move it to Transylvania County and have everybody from the east move there?
Dennis,
Think of the money we'd save. Think of the money we'd save. How cheap
Joe were
real estate
active in
is.
state government back in the 90s when there was a plan developed where all growth in state government buildings was going to take place on the Dix campus. You remember that? What happened to that? All of a sudden it's gone. Not only that, but we decided we were going to close Dix Hospital because it was old and antiquated and build one in Butner, which made no sense.
I'll tell you what I think happened, the speaker may agree with me, is that all of a sudden the city leaders of Raleigh got really paranoid that the state was going to sell that property at Dix and it was going to become something else. So they got in the act and bought it, and that's the rest of his history.
Exactly. Well, or some say that was given away.
There was no plan that people said, okay, we're going to follow this plan.
Council of State approved a plan for this.
Council of State changes.
It comes down to real estate transactions. And if you think about it this way, where's the best value for taxpayers for some of these big government complexes to be? And, you know, to move them, why do they have to be in Raleigh? Why does the Department of Health and Human Services have to be in Raleigh?
Don't you agree we do need some sort of philosophy? Are we going to lease or are we going to own?
Well, that's right.
Are we going to have a discussion about it, or are we going to stick it in the budget that we release at the last second?
That nobody knew anything about.
Nobody knew anything about.
All this leads to, I think there needs to be a comprehensive study about what we're doing and what our strategy is, and make it public so the public can have input.
Right, and public hearings, absolutely.
That's a good idea, but I think what we need to think about is, I mean, this is all transactional. Where's the best value? How can you make government work the most effective and efficiently using taxpayer money? You know, have we moved beyond having these big governmental complexes? A lot of people work online now. A lot of businesses do that.
We've got to take state employees into this too. We've got a lot of professionals working over at DHHS. And I can't see them moving to Granville County.
A lot of state employees have to live in Raleigh.
Well, they don't. But if your office is moved to Granville County,
because that's where the capital is.
That's where the capital is. That's where people want to live.
Oh, Isaac Hunter set this thing up.
That's where the government is.
And I was being
facetious. Where the airplanes land.
I was being facetious, but literally, if real estate values are the problem, then why Granville County? Why not in the rural northeastern part of North Carolina?
Why
not?
Have those and why can't people work online? I mean, does every single government
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we're going to resolve this question here today. When we talk about state budgets, we think in terms of revenues and expenditures, and there's about $23.9 billion in the general fund. But North Carolina's balance sheet contains several examples of unfunded liabilities, items we seldom talk about, yet are obligation the state owes. The state, we taxpayers. Examples include obligated payments to the state employees' retirement system and state health plan. Joe, you've done some research on these unfunded liabilities. Just how much do we owe?
My best estimate, based on data from 2018, is that the state owes $46 billion. And local governments own about $8 billion. That's $54 billion. To put it in context, that's 4 years of the total general fund. Your old boss, Harlan Boyle, said that pretty soon, if we didn't do something, that we were going to have those liabilities exceed state debt. He said that 40 years ago. When Dennis and I were making our reputations in the General Assembly, we attacked that problem with retirees' benefits, and We got it under control. By the mid-90s, we had no unfunded accrued liabilities
in retirement.
In retirement, okay. Now we finally have a state treasurer, Dale Falwell, who's got courage and candor and has raised this issue, and something has to be done. Let me tell you what just happened in Vermont. Vermont had a AAA bond rating because of their unfunded accrued liability in retirement. They are now AA1. It's coming, and it has to be addressed soon.
And Dennis, as far as it goes, people would say, well, it's just not our problem about these local governments that owe money, but in essence it is, isn't it? Because if they default, the state of North Carolina cannot afford, talking about bond rates, we can't afford to let them go down.
The Speaker's right. It's a double whammy, and we just got to pay attention. And I think the treasurer, the current treasurer, is doing that. He's putting a lot of capital into it. But the question really becomes is how we do it. Everybody knows we need to do it. And I think his way of trying to force some things may not be the best methodology. Maybe, again, we ought to call for a study and really talk about some rational ways to solve the problem.
And we have lots of examples in other states. As the Speaker mentioned, Vermont, just one of them, but other states are grappling with this as well. And as a matter of fact, North Carolina is generally in better shape. I mean, it's still a problem, but we're in a better shape than most states, which I think has delayed the discussion that we've had, because people say, well, you know, at least we're not as bad as Michigan.
But it's not going to get better if we don't do something to actively address it. And Treasurer Falwell is trying, and there's some that say his approach may not be the best, but at least he's trying to do that, right, Chris?
Well, I think he is, but also, you know, he shied away from some of the tough decisions when he was running, and there's only a few ways to do it. You make, who's going to pay? I mean, that's fundamentally who's going to pay to address this. The taxpayers, the retirees, how are you going to figure out how to start retiring this debt, how to pay more towards it? And somebody's going to have to make some tough decisions. Nobody that has a 2-year political term is going to make those decisions.
Or the legislature could give them some money.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Well, you know, there are several ways, but one way is to create an irrevocable trust that takes, let's say, 3/4 of the membership of the House and Senate to penetrate it. And you begin to put a percentage of the budget,
in there every year.
You treat it just like state debt.
Right. And you can do that now, but
you can do that now, and it would take 40 years to clear it up, and that's fine because it's a long-range problem.
Well, right now I'm going to offer our viewers a treat by asking you to tell us something we don't know. Becki Gray.
The Farm Act of 2019 is working its way through the General Assembly. It had another hearing in the Senate this week. Really interesting development with hemp and growing hemp and what that's going to look like. This is a good example of finding a balance between regulation and opening a market so that a market and industry can grow.
Dennis Wicker, tell us something we don't know.
Did you know North Carolina hosts one of the smallest incorporations in America? Delview has 13 people in it, and it's a municipality. No taxes are raised, nobody pays any taxes, there's no water and sewer. And the fact is their incorporation is now in suspension because in 1978, they did not participate in the census survey in Gaston County. Here's the question, why hasn't some legislator unincorporated them?
Interesting. You just planted the seed for somebody. Joe Mavretic, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I will stay on unencumbered liabilities. Asheville and Buncombe owe $152 million. Charlotte and Mecklenburg owe $706 million. Raleigh-Wake, $589 million. And Wilmington and New Hanover, $367 million. Those 4 MSAs have $1.8 billion in debt that you don't talk about.
And we talk about the Local Government Commission, but it was largely formed in the Great Depression because of the fact that these municipalities. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
Well, we did talk a lot about the budget, but interestingly, this past week, the state of New Hampshire ended the death penalty. The 25th state in the United States. New Hampshire is hardly a far-left liberal state. I think you're seeing a trend, a gradual trend around the country. We talked about this recently on NC Spin. This is happening, I think, conservatives and liberals alike are realizing this policy doesn't make any sense. New Hampshire just literally ended it this past week.
I got one. Thursday night at the North Carolina Museum of History, Rufus Edmisten held court for about 300 people as he premiered his new book, That's Rufus. It was a delightful evening, and Rufus told all sorts of stories, as you might imagine. Many of them are contained inside this book. I've gotten started reading it. It's a good read, and I recommend it to you. And the other thing was that we ran out of time, I'm sure, but June 5th, Speaker Moore has called for a vote on the live abortion bill. Does that mean he's got the votes to override?
I don't think he knows. But he's decided to pull this and hold this vote, and he'll have the entire House membership on record as to where they stand on this issue.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think he's come under some pretty stiff criticism for parking it in the garage, as they say, and not taking it up
until... He's had it on the agenda 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, so I think we'll see.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.